Hi everyone, it's Diane. I'm back again this week to share a little bit about what I've been thinking about. And this week's topic is difficult conversations. She's a lot written about conversation and why it is so difficult for us sometimes to prepare for those and to not avoid them and all of that kind of jazz. So excited to spend the next 10 minutes or so with you just chatting about a few thoughts and some of the resources that we have around getting better at these challenging conversations. So, just initially, I think it's important to do some self reflection and to think about what the difference is between a regular conversation and one that we deem to be difficult, and to think a little bit for you about what it is that makes a conversation difficult for you. Some of the things that we've talked about are things like being uncomfortable. Um, that it's not a pleasant experience when we think about difficult conversations, that they're often unpredictable. You can't control the outcome, and that sometimes we have to give people feedback, or sometimes we have to talk to parents about tricky situations, and that those are all unpredictable conversations. They're also often emotionally charged. So, emotions are unpredictable, straight up. Logic is predictable, emotions are not. And we're all human beings and we all have emotions. And so, when we enter into a conversation that is uncomfortable or that can be difficult, oftentimes the emotions of both parties become tricky. And, I think in a leadership role, when you are compelled to have a discussion with somebody about their performance or about something tricky, that the one thing that you can control in that is your own emotions and being aware of what it is that triggers you emotionally. What we can't do is we can't control or predict the other person's emotions. And so really what we need to do is focus on ourselves. We also have been talking about relationship and what a trusting relationship does to help with times where a difficult conversation needs to be had, and the difference between having a really friendly relationship, no relationship, and like always with those two sides of the spectrum, what's important in a leadership role is to land in the middle of that, where there's a professional, respectful relationship. And probably the common denominator, the secret ingredient to that is trust. And oftentimes it's easier to have a difficult conversation when you already have built a trusting relationship. We talked a lot about anticipation and how the other person will react. And again, that's not something that we can control in a difficult conversation. So the focus, as always, in pretty well everything that is leadership, is on ourselves and what it is that we can do to make it easier for ourselves and to gain practice. And, I always say that on a leadership journey, practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes better. And so an opportunity to think about and to practice tough conversations is an important piece of our work here today. So oftentimes giving feedback is something that people find difficult, and giving honest feedback. And we talk a lot about the difference between being nice and being kind and honest. And so oftentimes what happens for folks in a leadership role is they want to be liked. They want to be nice. And when we are focused on being nice, we often do everything we can actually to avoid upsetting or hurting another person. And when we're in a leadership role, what's in my books absolutely key is kindness and honesty. So you can have all sorts of challenging conversations in a kind and honest way, and that's really what we're focusing on today. When we think about preparation and a proactive approach and how it is that we can develop a relationship and build trust with the very people who we may have to have difficult conversations, who we have a vested interest in their development. Regular one-to-ones are essential. If you don't have a regular one-to-one, then what happens is things may build and build and build, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation where you have to have a conversation that's way more difficult than it ever needed to be, because it could have been prevented or addressed in a one-to-one check-in on a regular basis. The importance of listening and being curious is really key. And when we think about doing one-to-ones and having time together with people, listening to where they're at and what's going on for them, coming prepared to spend the time, prepared to invest in the relationship. When you're leading people, it's really important that you invest in them. And probably the biggest thing we have to invest is time. And again, time to be kind and honest, not necessarily time to be nice. Setting and tracking goals and focusing on future opportunities. Again, when somebody sees kind and honest feedback as part of their developmental growth, that's a whole different ball game than being nice and then all of a sudden having to have an incredibly difficult conversation because you haven't addressed or you haven't given feedback along the road. And, that happens all the time, whether it's dealing with parents or whether it's dealing with the very folks that we're trying to develop in our organization. Practice is an important thing. Preparation and practice. Now, let me talk about preparation first, because preparation is not the same as anticipation. For me, anticipation means dread. Anticipation means, oh my gosh, how can I control this? Isn't going to go well. This is going to be terrible. It's the anticipation of the unknown versus preparation, which is really everything you can do to set the stage for the best possible conversation to challenge somebody. Practice is another important piece of this. So practicing being kind and honest is really one of the best things that we can do, because the more we understand about honesty and kindness, the more able we are to have those really tough conversations when the time comes for those. So again, honesty is kind. Avoidance is nice. We talked a lot about emotional intelligence in our leadership sessions, and, again, can't reinforce the importance of that. And emotional intelligence is all about getting your emotions in check and being self-aware. So we all have things that trigger us. We all expect that there are certain things that somebody might say that will just, drive us nuts, or and so important to understand your triggers and check in with yourself before you have the conversation and during the conversation. And the other thing is about time and pause and patience. So sometimes when a conversation isn't going well, when emotions get escalated on either sides or both sides, the best possible thing you can do is say, hold on. Let's have this conversation when we've gone home, slept on it. Let's come back to this tomorrow. And the more able you are to get yourself in a more grounded, centered kind of an approach, the better able you are to come to some sort of mutual agreement at the end of the conversation. So don't be afraid to say, you know what? No, this isn't working right now. Let's come back to it. And maybe you come back to it the next day. Maybe you schedule it for the next week because you need some time. Again, depending on the situation. So there's a great article, Harvard Business Review article, called Tiptoeing Isn't Nice. And again, I think that the human response often to things is to avoid them. And again, as a leader, we have a responsibility to have developmental conversations. As somebody who works with families, we have a responsibility to talk to parents with the spirit of trying to figure out the best solutions or the best strategies for their kids. And so avoiding those conversations, tiptoeing around those conversations isn't nice. So again, kind and honest. There are sort of 4 steps, I would say, and this is based on an article by a woman named Judy Ringer called We Have to Talk. And I like the way she lays it out because she talks about 4 easy steps. The first step is inquiry. So being curious, seeking to understand, listening. Because when you're having a conversation with somebody, if you first understand where they're coming from and then try to come to some sort of agreement, it's a way better starting place. So seeking to understand. The second thing is acknowledgement. So when we acknowledge that that's how somebody feels, or that's the way they see something, or that that's really important to them, they feel like they're heard. And that's so important. It's important to us to feel like somebody is actually hearing what we're saying. So acknowledging that that's where they're at is the second step. So far we've got inquiry and acknowledgement. The third step is advocacy, which in my books is synonymous with honesty. So advocacy is saying, this is my position, because your position may be very different from the position of the person that you're talking to. So you've acknowledged that for them, this is a problem. And the advocacy step is actually saying, now for me, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm experiencing. This is where I'm at. This clarifies my position. And the fourth step is problem solving. And can you find common ground? And what we know is difficult conversations that actually end in a common ground, in mutual agreement, are the best kinds of conversations. And oftentimes some conversations that people will remember years afterwards. So again, get prepared. Follow those 4 steps: inquiry, acknowledgement, advocacy, and problem solving. And last but not least, be kind and honest. Forget about being nice. Leaders are not nice. Leaders are kind and they're honest. So that's what I'm thinking about today. Practice, keep at it, and thanks again for joining me today. Bye-bye.